Every single day he was there, a lean Doberman, sitting quietly next to a rusty storm drain, eyes locked on the darkness within. His behavior puzzled the locals, but no one dared to look too closely. That is until one day the grate was finally opened, and what they found inside left everyone speechless. This story touched hearts all around. If it moved you too, please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. In many parts of the world, stray dogs are simply part of the scenery. But this particular dog managed to capture people's hearts with the way he acted in a quiet seaside town where the streets were lined with cobblestones, and the breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed. A black and rust-cold Doberman wandered silently through the alleys. Though his size and sharp features could be intimidating, his eyes told another story, soft, searching, as if he were always looking for something or someone. The day began with the sound of waves crashing in the distance, and the Doberman making his way down the narrow lanes of the early morning market. Fishing boats returned to the docks and merchants were setting up stalls with fresh catches. The dog moved with purpose, ears perked up, alert to every sound and scent. Even though he clearly lived on the streets, he wasn't aggressive. He avoided people for the most part, but didn't mind the occasional hand offering him a scrap of bread or fish. As he sniffed around near the edge of the market, the Doberman suddenly froze. His whole body tensed, eyes fixed in one direction. A delicious smell floated through the air from a grill beside a small cafe. Quietly he crept forward, slipping between stacked crates and fishing nets drying in the sun. His gaze locked on a grill where chunks of fish were sizzling. A soft growl from his belly broke the silence, a familiar reminder of his constant hunger. Inside the cafe, a young woman named Emily was finishing up a purchase. A few thick steaks from the butcher next. As she stepped outside, a faint whimper made her pause. She glanced around, puzzled, until her eyes landed on the Doberman standing a short distance away, staring at her. His body looked strong, even proud, but there was a softness in his expression, a quiet plea for help without a single sound. Seeing the hungry dog stirred something in Emily's chest. His powerful frame was a stark contrast to his visible ribs and matted fur, rough from life on the street. She looked down at the grilled fish she had just bought, then back at him. After a brief moment of thought, she turned away and headed toward a fisherman cleaning his nets by the dock. "Do you happen to have any leftover fish? It's for that dog over there," she asked, nodding toward the Doberman, who was still watching from a distance. The fisherman raised his eyebrows, then smiled. "Oh, him? Yeah, he's always hanging around here. Just a sec." He dug through a nearby bucket filled with scraps, pulling out a fish head and a thick chunk of meat. "Here you go. He'll like this," he said, handing the pieces to Emily. Smiling in gratitude, Emily made her way back to where she'd seen the Doberman. He was still there near a stack of crates, now sitting, but his eyes were locked on her every move. Gently, she knelt down and held out the pieces of fish. The dog didn't move right away. He just stared at her as if trying to decide whether or not to trust her. After a few tense seconds, he slowly started to approach, his paws carefully pressing against the damp cobblestones. When he finally reached The food, he picked it up delicately, between his teeth, never once taking his eyes off Emily. But what happened next caught her off guard. Instead of eating, the Doberman turned and walked away, quickly, as if he had somewhere to be. Emily stood there, puzzled, watching him disappear toward the edge of the pier, the fish still hanging from his mouth. Something about that moment stuck with her. It was unusual for a stray dog to behave like that. He didn't just seem hungry. He seemed driven by a purpose, curious, and a little concerned. Emily promised herself that if she saw him again, she'd try to understand what was behind this strange dog's behavior. The next day, walking down the same street, Emily spotted the Doberman sitting by the entrance to a narrow alley, almost like he'd been waiting for her. As she got closer, he stood up, his tail wagging hesitantly. His stance was still cautious, but there was something different in his eyes, a faint glimmer of trust. With slow, calm movements, Emily opened the bag she'd brought and pulled out a few treats she had picked up just for him. The Doberman approached, carefully took the food with that same quiet gentleness, and once again turned and walked away. But this time, Emily couldn't hold back her curiosity. She decided to follow him. He moved with clear intent, his step steady and confident on the stone path. Every now and then, he looked over his shoulder to make sure Emily was still there. Her heart started to race. What was he trying to show her? The whole scene felt too deliberate to ignore. After several minutes of walking through increasingly quiet streets, the Doberman finally stopped in front of a large storm drain. Its rusted grate was partly covered in dry leaves. He sat down beside it, eyes fixed on the dark opening below. Emily stood at a distance, watching as the dog gently dropped one of the treats he'd just been given into the drain. For a moment, everything was silent, except for the distant sound of trickling water. The Doberman remained perfectly still, as if waiting. He tilted his head slightly and let out a soft whine, almost like he was calling to someone. Emily furrowed her brow and leaned forward, trying to get a better look, but the inside of the drain remained hidden in shadow, unsure of what to make of it. She approached cautiously. Kneeling beside the Doberman, she peered into the drain, wondering what could possibly hold his attention so completely. He still couldn't see anything clearly, but there was something in the dog's posture, the way he watched the darkness, with such intensity that told her this meant something. His eyes, alert and almost pleading, seemed to ask for help. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. What could be down there? And why did the Doberman keep coming back to this exact spot? In the days that followed, Emily began seeing the Doberman in the same place each time, sitting beside the storm drain, always watching. It was as if that spot had become the center of his world. Every time she brought him food, he repeated the same strange behavior, dropping part of it into the drain before eating the rest. It wasn't a mistake or a quirky habit. It felt deliberate, almost like a ritual. Emily's curiosity grew stronger with each passing day. She couldn't stop thinking about what was behind it. Finally, one quiet afternoon, with the market winding down and the sound of seagulls overhead, Emily decided it was time to find out what was hidden in that drain. As she approached, the Doberman lifted his head, his eyes following her closely, but he didn't move. Something about his demeanor was different that day, almost as if he knew she was ready. Taking a deep breath, Emily crouched beside the storm drain. The rusted iron grate let out a faint creak as she pressed her hands against it. Carefully, she peered through the dark gaps. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just shadows and the damp edges of concrete. But then, a slight movement caught her. Something was down there. She held her breath and squinted, trying to adjust her vision to the darkness. What she saw made her heart skip a beat, a small, hesitant shape, something clearly alive. Before she could make out any more details, the sound of footsteps behind her snapped her out of focus. Startled, Emily looked up to see a man in uniform walking by on the nearby street, taking it as a sign. She pulled out her phone and with shaky fingers called the fire department, explaining the situation as clearly as she could. As she waited, the Doberman remained right beside her, motionless, watching her with a mix of urgency and hope. He looked from her to the drain and back again, as if trying to say that this was the moment he'd been waiting for. About 30 minutes later, the distant sound of sirens signaled that help was on the way. Emily felt both relief and nervous anticipation as she waved down the arriving firefighters. They jumped off the truck, carrying tools and a bright flashlight. Emily quickly described what she had seen inside the drain, her heart still racing at the memory of the movement in the shadows. The firefighters, though skeptical at first, listened carefully and began to inspect the area. Meanwhile, the Doberman, who had been calm and patient up until then, began to shift. Now on his feet, his body was tense, ears alert, eyes tracking every move the firefighters made. When one of them approached the crate with a tool to pry it open, the dog let out a low, warning growl. Emily was taken aback by the sudden change in his demeanor. It was clear now. The Doberman didn't see this as help. He was being protective. I think he's trying to guard whatever's down there, Emily said quietly to one of the firefighters. He knelt beside the dog, speaking to him in a gentle voice. Hey, it's okay. They just want to help, she whispered, pulling a treat from her bag and holding it out to him. He hesitated, eyes still locked on the firefighters, but eventually accepted the treat. Taking the chance, Emily looped a piece of rope she had brought with her around his neck, gently guiding him away from the grade. With the Doberman secured, the firefighters focused their attention back on the storm drain. By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the unusual murmurs and curious glances filled the air as people watched Emily and the Doberman, wondering what was going on. The firefighters worked quickly, using tools to pry open the heavy corroded cover. After a few minutes of effort, a loud creak echoed through the street as the grate finally gave way. Everyone fell silent, eyes locked on the now open drain. One of the firefighters knelt at the edge and shined his flashlight down into the darkness. He was quiet for a moment, carefully studying what lay below. Then his voice broke the silence filled with surprise. There's something alive in here. The crowd held its breath and Emily felt a chill crawl down her spine. Next to her, the Doberman, even with the rope still around him, leaned forward as if sensing that the moment he'd waited for had arrived. The firefighter leaned further into the opening, moving the beam of light slowly. In one corner of the drain, the flashlight revealed three small, trembling shapes. Their eyes glowed in the beam, wide with fear. They were fox pups, thin, nervous, but very much alive. They watched the activity above with a mix of terror and wonder. "They're fox cubs," the firefighter called out, lifting his head to face Emily and the others. A wave of surprise and awe spread through the gathered crowd. Emily pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. Next to her, the Doberman gave a slight tug on the makeshift leash, his body tilting toward the drain. His eyes were locked on the pups, and at that moment, everything made sense. He had been protecting them all along. The firefighters began planning how to bring the pups out safely. One of them lowered a small animal carrier into the drain, speaking softly to avoid frightening them further. Meanwhile, Emily gently stroked the Doberman, who whined softly, restless. It felt as if he were pleading for everything to go well. Inside the drain, the fox cubs huddled close together, still nervous, but no longer in danger. Their reddish fur was dirty and matted, but their curious eyes peeked out from the shadows. Once the cubs were out and safely placed in the carrier, the crowd slowly began to disperse. The firefighters explained that the young foxes would be taken to a local wildlife rescue center where they would receive care before eventually being released back into the wild. The pups were loaded into the rescue truck. The Doberman let out a long, audible sigh and finally relaxed. He lay down next to Emily, his eyes still on the truck as if he knew his job was done. In the days that followed, Emily couldn't get the Doberman out of her mind. She began visiting the wildlife rehabilitation center regularly, asking about the fox cubs' progress. They were slowly gaining weight and strength on their way to recovery. As for the Doberman, he had become a constant presence in Emily's life. She decided to adopt him, knowing deep down that he deserved more than a life on the streets. He now had a name, Hero, a tribute to the incredible care and protection he had shown toward the fox cubs. Weeks later, Emily received the news she had been waiting for. The cubs were ready to return to the wild. She was invited to witness the release in a protected nature reserve. Standing beside her, Hero watched silently as the young foxes darted into the trees. His head was held high, almost as if he were saying goodbye. The experience changed both Emily and Hero forever, forging a bond that could only come from an act of compassion and an unwavering instinct to protect. And deep down, Emily knew Hero wasn't just any dog. He was a true guardian. Now, imagine an animal that spent over 20 years in the chains, finally set free, but unable to take a single step toward freedom. Instead of running, she hides. Instead of roaring, she stays silent. Slowly, she begins to fade away, as if freedom was more frightening than the chains. Was there still hope for her? Or was it already too late to bring back the soul of a predator that had forgotten how to live? Want to find out what happened and feel the emotions behind this powerful story? Don't miss the next video on Shoe Curious Whiskers. Click the video on your screen and join me. Big emotions always come with big stories. See you there.